Earlier this morning, President Biden appeared to support the Israeli government's claim that it is not responsible for the hospital attack.
I was deeply saddened and outraged by the explosion at the hospital in Gaza yesterday. And based on what I've seen, it appears as though it was done by the other team, not you.
Let's bring in Ed O'Keefe, who's at the White House monitoring all of this. Ed, good morning to you. Based on what I've seen, is what the president said. First off, I think a lot of people thought he might turn the plane around and not arrive in Israel for these meetings. Half of them were canceled anyway, but he has, which makes one think maybe he's seen intelligence from the U.S. side suggesting that what Israel is claiming is, in fact, accurate. Do you know, have you heard, is he basing what he said there on any kind of underlying intel?
We've been asking that, Tony, because it was striking that he said that so defiantly, that based on what he's seen. So it means, potentially, that he saw something on his flight over that suggests to him it was indeed somebody or some entity within Gaza that caused this. But when he says the other team, that could also be in dispute. If you understand the politics of that region, and I'm not necessarily the best one for this, but in all our reporting, we know there's Hamas and there's other militant groups. And the question is, was it Hamas or was it some other entity that was firing off that rocket or whatever that explosion was that would have caused this? His words, as he said them, will be received quite differently in that part of the world than they will be, of course, over here, which is another reason why the White House will be sensitive to explaining what exactly it is he's seen and why he can be so sure it was someone other than Israel.
Yeah, and let's talk about the politics for just a second, Ed. You know, several high-ranking U.S. officials already have been to Israel and are still there. Why do you think he felt he needed to be there in person when it's so complicated at this particular time and dangerous?
Well, two things. First of all, Israel, of course, is one of the closest, most important U.S. allies there is. And so, you know, think of if something like this, God forbid, had happened in the United Kingdom or in Canada. You know, Israel's up there with those countries. And perhaps Americans have forgotten that because the region has not necessarily been as violent or as front page as it had been in the past. And for this president, who spent, of course, decades as a senator, Israel was always a critical piece of his own work and his focus when he was in the Senate and when he was vice president, saying that if not for Israel, one would have to be created, or that it is a strong and essential ally for the United States and critical to the future of the Middle East. So he personally wanted to go there in the wake of this, even amid the differences he's had with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in recent years, and his push, his desire to refocus U.S. foreign policy towards China and other parts of the world and away from a conflict that has troubled and never been successful for any American president in modern times.
Ed, the Biden administration is considering asking Congress for more aid for Israel. What does more aid look like?
That's a good question, Nate, and it's going to depend on a lot of things happening down the street here in Washington. Who will end up running the House of Representatives? What will then Republicans in that chamber, plus Republicans and Democrats in the Senate, be willing to go for? The universe of money and aid we expect will be something in the neighborhood of $100 billion, not just for Israel, but also, and probably most of it, for Ukraine and that ongoing conflict, plus potentially money for Taiwan and other Indo-Pacific countries trying to protect themselves from China's growing influence in that region and the aggressive moves it's making, but also potentially plus border security money or something to address the ongoing immigration issues in this country. That, the White House believes, could be the mix of things that requires what they call supplemental or extra money to get through the domestic and global crises facing the United States and that Congress need to weigh in on. And the reason it's so big is they'd like to pass it for a full year through the next election so that Congress doesn't get caught up in some kind of spending debate with the White House in the midst of elections next year.
All right, Ed at the White House breaking it down as usual. We appreciate you.